Welcome to the Tutor to You Sociology topic video on beliefs in society. In this video we're going to look at sects and the organisation known as Heaven's Gate. Heaven's Gate, a small religious group led by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, is remembered for its tragic ending in 1997 when 39 members committed mass suicide in California. Heaven's Gate combined elements of Christianity with New Age beliefs, science fiction and ideas of extraterrestrial salvation, marking it as a unique and extreme example of a religious sect. In this video we're going to look at the group's defining characteristics, a timeline of its development and its classification as a sect within sociology. Heaven's Gate attracted individuals who felt alienated or disconnected from mainstream society. The group's doctrines and practices set it apart from traditional religious groups and were instrumental in maintaining strong control over its members. Heaven's Gate taught that followers were extraterrestrial souls temporarily housed in human bodies. They believed they would eventually be saved by extraterrestrial beings who would transport them to a higher plane of existence on a spacecraft, thus escaping Earth and achieving transcendence. Heaven's Gate followers believed the end of the world was imminent and that human existence was corrupt. They saw themselves as preparing for a higher evolutionary level, which they would reach through strict adherence to group teachings and detachment from earthly attachments. Members practiced celibacy, abstained from personal possessions, and followed strict dietary and social rules. This lifestyle reinforced their detachment from the human world and promoted a shared identity among group members. Some members even underwent voluntary castration to reduce their sexual impulses, emphasizing their commitment to purity. Applewhite and Nettles held absolute authority controlling the group's beliefs, daily activities, and personal decisions. Members adhered to a uniform way of life, often wearing identical clothing, hairstyles, and eventually the same attire in preparation for the final event. Applewhite was perceived as a divine figure, reinforcing the group's dependency on his guidance. Members distanced themselves from family and friends, focusing exclusively on the group. Heaven's Gate frequently relocated, keeping a low profile and avoiding mainstream society. This isolation enhanced the leader's influence over members and minimized outside interference or skepticism. Unusually for a religious sect, Heaven's Gate used the internet to spread its message and attract new followers. Members ran a web design business, which provided income and served as a tool to disseminate their beliefs to a wider audience, including through their now famous website. Heaven's Gate developed over several decades, with key events shaping the group's beliefs and ultimately leading to its tragic conclusion. In 1972, Applewhite, a former music teacher, met Bonnie Nettles, a nurse in Texas. They felt an intense spiritual connection, and Nettles convinced Applewhite they were destined for a divine mission. The pair developed a belief system combining Christianity, New Age ideas, and extraterrestrial themes. In 1975, Applewhite and Nettles began travelling across the United States, recruiting followers for what would become Heaven's Gate. They told potential members that they were the two witnesses mentioned in the book of Revelation, and that they had been sent to help humanity ascend to a higher level of existence. By the mid-1970s, the group had attracted dozens of followers who were encouraged to break ties with their families and live communally. Applewhite and Nettles referred to themselves as Do and T, respectively, and conducted their teachings as a class, emphasizing discipline, purity, and obedience. Nettles' death from cancer marked a turning point for Heaven's Gate. Although Applewhite had initially believed they would both physically ascend together, Nettles' death forced him to reinterpret the group's beliefs. He taught that Nettles had shed her earthly container and reached a higher plane of existence. This shift led the group to focus more on the idea that they, too, would one day leave their bodies behind to ascend. After Nettles' death, Heaven's Gate became more reclusive. Applewhite tightened his control over the group, emphasizing total commitment and strict discipline. Followers were required to live monastically, practicing celibacy, communal sharing of resources, and isolation from family and friends. In the early 1990s, Applewhite began teaching that the group's ascension was near and that they would be picked up by a spaceship. In 1997, news of the Hale-Bopp comet became central to their beliefs, as Applewhite convinced members that a spacecraft was trailing the comet and would rescue them from Earth. On March 26, 1997, the bodies of 39 Heaven's Gate members were discovered in a mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California. The members, dressed identically in black clothing and Nike shoes, had died in a mass suicide over the course of several days. They ingested a lethal mixture, pentobarbital, and alcohol, believing this act would allow their souls to board the spaceship accompanying the Hale-Bopp comet. Heaven's Gate can be classified as a sect due to its departure from mainstream religion, its high level of control over members, and its strong sense of apocalyptic urgency. Although Heaven's Gate incorporated elements of Christianity, its emphasis on extraterrestrial beliefs and ideas of salvation through ascension to a higher evolutionary level distinguished it from traditional religious practices. Applewhite's leadership is seen as a form of charismatic authority. His followers viewed him as a divine figure, fully accepting his interpretations of the world and obeying his guidance unquestioningly. His charisma and perceived spiritual insight gave him the power to control all aspects of members' lives. Members of Heaven's Gate were expected to abandon their families, possessions, and even their identities to follow the group's strict lifestyle. This high level of commitment, along with enforced celibacy and communal living, fostered total devotion to the group. Heaven's Gate viewed the world as corrupt and in decline, focusing on a future event, ascension through extraterrestrial salvation that would redeem its members. Applewhite's teachings were highly apocalyptic, warning of an imminent transformative event that only the faithful would survive. And finally, Heaven's Gate ultimately exemplified a radical form of asceticism and obedience, culminating in mass suicide as the ultimate act of faith. This event serves as a stark reminder to the extremism that can arise with isolated religious sects under a charismatic leader. Heaven's Gate serves as an extreme example of the power that charismatic leaders and apocalyptic beliefs can wield within isolated sects. Applewhite's teachings and the group's rigid lifestyle ultimately led to a shared worldview that justified and even celebrated mass suicide as a form of transcendence. For sociologists, Heaven's Gate provides a powerful case study of the dynamics within high-control sects and the psychological and social mechanisms that can drive groups towards devastating actions in the name of faith. That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on beliefs in society, looking at sects and Heaven's Gate. Thanks for watching.